and I'm unloading the car in front of the house. And I look up, and there is an old model black Cadillac idling in front of the house, and there's a camera with a wide-angle lens pointing at me. And I'm thinking, what the fuck is this, right? I wasn't involved in anything particularly weird at the time, so I put down the package of groceries. And I start walking over to the car, because this is unusual. This doesn't happen in these small towns like this at this time. This is, I think, 1990. And I walk over, and the car takes off, right? Like, really fast. So I'm going to follow him. I go to my car, and I'm going to get ready to the car to pull out of the driveway and follow this car, because now this is really weird. It's like a government thing or a private detective or God knows what. And as I'm trying to get in my car, another car pulls into the driveway, blocking me.
Welcome back. I'm here again with Peter Levenda. Peter, welcome back.
Thanks very much for having me.
Okay, so we started getting into disclosure in the last episode, and I kind of left a scary scenario that could feasibly happen. That if a government is not generally truthful and obscures things, it has an impact in other areas of just regular day-to-day life that could really impact society. So in talking about disclosure, what secret do you think is so dark or so dangerous that they wouldn't even go as far as saying, we acknowledge that non-human intelligences exist?
Do you remember, to go back to the movie JFK, the Donald Sutherland figure based on Fletcher Prouty? Sutherland tells Kevin Costner, Jim Garrison, what is the first responsibility of any government? What's the organizing principle of government? It's national defense. Mm-hmm. That's like, government has to defend the people. If you can't defend your people, you have no legitimacy as a government. So take that and port that to this discussion now. And this discussion that we're having now is also about national defense. The problem is, because the government does not know what the hell this is, they can't defend us from it. And that casts their idea of sovereignty, of national sovereignty, into complete chaos, into doubt. If they cannot protect us from it, then what is their purpose, right? Why do we keep following the government? So they can't come out and admit how little they really know. They know more than we know, right? Or they have more data. They may not know more than we know, but they have more data. Obviously, we saw from the videos they have more data. Do they have a crashed vehicle? Possibly. If they do, how has that been kept away from us for all this time? Is it just a piece of metal they don't know what to do with? Or is it something really sophisticated? What is it? We don't know. So they have more data. I'm sure, however, they don't really have the key, the answer to this situation. They can't come out and say, we know what this is. We know where they're from. We know, all of this. I think they don't. I think that's the secret. The secret is they don't. The emperor has no clothes. Okay. We think that they're defending us. I think all of this, but a UFO can show up anywhere at any time over any military base, as they've been doing, over a farmhouse in Ohio, anywhere they want to. There's no stopping them. There's no shooting them down, right? There's no protecting people against it. We can't predict when they're going to show up. We can't predict what they're going to look like when they show up, right? They have all different kinds of sizes and shapes. We can't predict what kind of effect it's going to have on cattle, on people, on the land. We have no way of knowing any of this. That's demonstrable. We know it because they show up when they want to. I wrote a trilogy of Lovecraft novels, and in one of them I referred to them as the government of the sky, right? They're up there. They've been up there forever. We start flying up in the heavens. We send rockets into space. We send satellites to the far reaches of the solar system. We're in their territory now, right? This used to be, they could run around like crazy and they would not be bothered. Now we're up there, right? And because we are up there, we expect our government to come back and tell us everything is secure, everything is safe. Well, they can't.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Bain Books at Bain.com.
They can't do it because these things show up where they want to, not just in the United States. They show up in China. They show up in Russia. They turn off missile silos. They turn on missile silos. They simulate attacks, and they stop simulating the attacks. I mean, it's crazy stuff that goes on out there. And they're attracted by military maneuvers. They're attracted by this kind of thing. It seems to draw their attention. Maybe it started with the atomic explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Maybe that really opened the portal, in a sense, that really got their attention. And now it's a constant kind of thing. We don't know, but the government doesn't know. If they could lie to us, as Lewis Black used to say, the comedian, I want my government to lie to me. I'm comfortable with that. Don't just start telling me the truth and like making me nuts, right? So lie to us, right? Say, oh, we know what this is, or, but they've been lying in a way that is facile, and it doesn't make any sense anymore because we have our phones, we have our cameras, we can see with our own eyes what's going on, and we can look at mountains of evidence that are coming through, and reputable people making statements to Congress, right? We know they can't keep telling us there's nothing to see here. We know that. So come on, let's get to the next stage here. And when they do start doing that, the problem is we don't believe them. Right. I was working with Tom DeLonge, as you know, with that whole To the Stars group. And Chris Mellon was part of that, in the very beginning, very intelligent, very nice guy, knows where all the bodies are buried, basically. And he got annoyed when we all came out and the government came out and the New York Times came out and said, yes, Virginia, there are UFOs. And we were attacked by the UFO community. Attacked. We can't believe you. You're from the government. But you're looking for disclosure. Who's it going to come from, right? And Chris Mellon used to say, why won't they take yes for an answer, right? We're telling them, yes, there's UFOs. Yes, we've known about them for years. Yes, it's true. Take off the tinfoil hats. You're saved, free at last, right? You don't have to be considered psychos anymore. This is genuine. It's true. And then we were roundly, attacked constantly. No, these people, Tom DeLonge is a tool of the deep state. Are you kidding me, Tom DeLonge? And I'm a tool of the deep state. Like, where's my check then in that case, right? I mean, we're just saying what we know. We're just saying the people that we spoke with are willing to talk to this level. There's a level beyond which they can't, not just because of NDAs, but because of their security clearances. They can go to jail, right? As has happened to people who have broken a minor security clearance case. One document maybe leaks out. They're in jail for 5 years. So these people know the family jewels, or they know where they're buried. They're not going to come out and just blurt it all out. They're waiting for Congress to move and to say, it's okay. You have our blessing. You're not going to go to jail. We're not going to prosecute you. Come out and tell the truth. And Congress is resisting this, right? They're resisting going that extra mile because they don't know what else is going to come out when they do that, right?
Yeah, there's people who have very likely been murdered to keep this secret. And apparently some people are still being murdered. Scientists in the white that get too close to certain secrets. And again, who's doing the murdering, right? I mean, the way all this works, it could be a government contract to an aerospace defense company that subcontracts this, silencing witnesses to somebody else, so the right hand doesn't know what the left. It feels like it's kind of gotten a little bit out of control. And the other thing I worry about is I think there's a secret much, much, much darker, like super, super dark. I don't think it's that we don't know what it is, because there are a lot of smart people working in government. And I think the conceit there is, look, we protect you from other humans. Like, that's bad enough, right? We make sure that contracts are upheld. There is a role of government that you need. We protect you from other foreign governments that can intercede. So that's kind of point one. So there still is a point of government number two, by letting people know, number two, you have to apologize for keeping people in the dark, for gaslighting people for however many years. And then number three, there's a lot of untapped potential in terms of figuring what this stuff is. You could redirect the resources of an entire nation on figuring out a better model for the nature of reality. And by keeping this kind of in the can, the longer they do that, the more that they're rolling the dice on the fundamental stability of not only kind of the United States institutions, but global institutions out there. Because there are other countries that have acquired craft as well. We're not the only ones. Right.
But I think, though, when you're saying that they know more, I'm still not sure they know more. Like I say, I think they have more data, but I don't think they know. I think we're dealing with a phenomenon that is stretching the limits of our understanding of reality, of consciousness even. And I think that we can't assume, imagine the scenario, the sort of Majestic 12 scenario, right? Or the President Eisenhower scenario. Imagine that scenario. Okay, so there's a couple of aliens show up and talk to Eisenhower and say, this is what we have to do. We'll make a deal with you. What? I can't get my head around. I cannot imagine that happening.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
I can imagine something really weird showing up in the Oval Office, right? Sort of a shimmering blob or something, making Cthulhu-like noises and then disappearing again. I can imagine all kinds of weird stuff, but I can't imagine anything on a one-to-one level, an alien coming down and saying, look, guy, this is what we're going to have to do now from now on. You keep our secret, we'll keep yours. We know who killed Kennedy. We'll keep that between ourselves, right? But you keep, really? Are they that humanoid or human-like that you can cut deals with them? That you can make this agreement? Like they keep talking about there's this agreement. I hear this all the time in the UFO community, the fringes of the UFO community. There was an agreement with the United States government back in the 50s. Are you kidding me? Right? Number one, really? Number two, how do you enforce an agreement like that with these guys?
You don't.
Who has all the cards, right?
How do you know they are who they say they are from where they say they're from?
Exactly.
Right.
Have they come down and they're saying, we're going to protect you from the other bad guys, from the other aliens, because they're worse than we are? And how do you communicate that with beings that do not communicate in our language? They can't possibly communicate in our language unless they've been here and they've been monitoring it and learning it somehow.
Unless they created us, right? But again, I don't. There's so many different theories out there that the one thing I think the government does know is they have a better sense of what's BS, because a lot of these BS stories were seeded by the government, right? In order to protect, not necessarily for bad. They might want to protect nuclear assets or to protect the F-117A project and things like that. So there's that element too, but that's difficult to untangle, because if you say, yeah, that was just a story we put out to protect this program. Oh, wait, that program doesn't even exist yet, right? We can't even talk about that yet. So there's a lot of things you have to entangle, but they have to have some sort of core truth. What are the core truths? Did something crash at Roswell? Yes or no, right? Did we acquire bodies? Were they really humanoid bodies? Well, why were they humanoid bodies, right? Is it a panspermia scenario where this star-shaped kind of form is normal, or are they avatars for something far stranger? Are they biological androids adapted to look like? There's so many different rabbit holes that you could go down. Just one core story. Just tell us something, kind of what you know. And then you can crowdsource. You don't have to spend all this money in these deep. Right. And most of the money they spend on, I don't know this for sure, but I would think that a significant portion of their budget is for security, for keeping these things secret. Right? So.
But is it buried in the government or is it buried in private enterprise, right? Is it Lockheed Martin that's got it, right? Is it, skunk works, right? Who really has it? I mean, and what level? I mean, at what point do you have the security level that you need to go and look at this stuff? And I think that's in a completely different world, right? That your normal intelligence, military guys and stuff have no clue, no contact, no inkling. That stuff is taken out of and then so it's like a handful of people who would have access to something like this. And these are human beings, right? Can we trust human beings with this access? Can you trust anybody that we think of in the government with this access? I mean, so this is what I mean. Would an alien trust anybody in our government? I mean, we wouldn't. Why would they? So there's this level of complexity here that we're talking about. We keep projecting an anthropomorphic idea as to how this works, but it's wrong. We can't keep doing that. We're dealing with something that's totally outside of our realm of experience. And even the military and the scientists and the lab guys and everything else, they don't have, as far as I'm concerned, they don't have the tools they need. And I said it in the Secret Machines books, and I've said it in podcasts before. We need everybody in on this. We need the artists and the writers and the musicians in on it. We need the archaeologists and the anthropologists, the psychiatrists. We need everybody working on this project because it's going to affect every single aspect of culture. If this ever comes out, it's going to affect everything in ways that we can't imagine. So we got to start working on it now. We got to start working on scenarios, game plans, war gaming it essentially, figuring out how to deal with this. What can we do? What do we have to defend ourselves against? Is it a consciousness war? Are we going to wake up one morning, as I've said before, and we're all dreaming the same dream, right? Because that's what's happening, right? Because that's the territory they're invading. I mean, there's all different ways of looking at this. We got to work on it now, and we're not doing it because we're waiting for the government to come clean. I say, screw that. Work 100%. On it now. Do it now because we can come up with these scenarios now. We don't need to see the physical craft right now. It'd be great. Or the physical bodies would be great if there was such a thing. But we know this is happening. It's up there. It's spinning around. It's doing stuff, right? There's even the whole abduction phenomenon, which is a whole maybe separate issue. I don't know. But let's work on it. Let's figure it out. Let's see commonalities. Let's start pulling at this the way we really should. Deconstruct all of this and find out what's really happening because we can do it ourselves. If we're waiting for the government to do it, I mean, the government may be waiting for us to do it. Maybe they're scared to death that if they say anything, it's going to cause chaos and panic. The story we always get, right? Religions will fall and all this other stuff.
Yeah, I think that's... But speaking of which, actually, there's two other things I wanted to mention. Yeah. It relates to this. Have you seen this thing floating around? I don't know if it's real or not. This new theology of the Catholic Church that they're floating. Have you seen this?
I've heard about it. Yep.
Okay, so it's not some conspiracy theory, not crazy. They're actually floating.
It was reported in the Italian newspapers, whether or not we can trust that source or not, but it was reported there. When the Italian newspapers report the church, all the time. So I don't know if this is like a leaked thing, like they're trying to test the waters, perhaps. But the church, the Catholic Church, has never been against this idea that there's life on other planets, right? There's been theological speculation, but Jesus died for us. Did he die for the people on Mars, right? So there's all these, discussions being had, but there's really no obstacle. I mean, I was born and raised Catholic, and so there's really no obstacle to it. And I raised these questions when I was a kid. I was like really weird, and I got, the nuns were a little frightened of me. And I would say, what about other planets? Did Jesus die for them too? What other planets? What are you talking about? There's nobody out there. No, but there could be, right? And so we get into these arguments in the 50s, right? But the church has never been really anti-alien in that sense. They've not been against this idea. Also, Islam, Muslims are not against it either. They can accommodate the fact that there's people in other worlds. So they're pretty flexible about this. There's a Christian fundamentalist aspect, though, which is against it. They think everything is from the devil that's not from the earth. So, there's that to contend with. But I think the church has been flexible on this kind of from the beginning. They never really came out and attacked the idea. They were kind of, well, God works in mysterious ways and he's created the universe and, all of this. So there must be life and why not? And they'll all be saved as well,
This new theology that they're floating, though, it goes way beyond that. It's almost someone who's kind of a doctrinal Catholic might even get a little uncomfortable with it. So other life in the universe, that's certainly part of it, but it's almost like a panpsychic sort of, i.e. there's consciousness in everything, right? So if you've ever read Stalking the Wild Pendulum by Itzhak Bentov,
Yeah,
so
sure.
it's almost, I'm just kind of develop a shorthand for what I read. It
Right.
felt a lot like that, where you have different levels of consciousness. There's stars are conscious, they're living beings. I mean, literally, it was kind of putting this out, talked about reincarnation, which that's a huge no-no in doctrinal Catholicism. So again, I don't know if this is a leak or if it's real, but you mentioned also about us kind of creating our own realities, right? And with that, you could see the intelligence community being terrified of panpsychic collapse, right? So if you had people suddenly realize that they're manifesting their realities, and for some reason the mass of humanity gets more paranoid, which
Yeah.
if that is the way reality works, it's obviously operating right now. You kind of see, look at the world right now with the war in Ukraine, you got the war in Gaza. There's a lot of weird things going on related to China and Taiwan right now. There's the CEO of the Foremost Group who backed her Tesla into a lake in February. Turns out, again, this is all this Sinister Forces stuff. She was Mitch McConnell's. There's just a lot of this stuff. The other thing I want to mention very briefly in passing, I'm going to ask you this question, but I want to just tell you, probably some background. So there's this solar eclipse, right, on April 8th. Okay. Do you know what happened 120 years ago on April 8th?
Sure. Aleister Crowley got the Book of the Law in Cairo, Egypt.
Yeah, but IWAS. You're the first person who that I know that made that connection other than me. 120-year anniversary on April 8th.
And 120 is important, right?
I did not know this part. Okay.
Well, if you study the Rosicrucian documents, the burial of Christian Rosenkreutz, there are these documents that came out around the 17th century, right? That created the Rosicrucian Society. So their founder is Christian Rosenkreutz. That's their alleged founder, right? Sort of a mythical figure, maybe. And they found his tomb, right? And they opened the tomb. And the statement on the tomb is, you can open this after 120 years, right? So the 120 years is quite important in the Western Hermetic tradition. So 120 years is an important time frame. It means, somebody died and then somebody is reborn in that period. There's like a new age essentially coming. So there's this rebirth of Christian Rosenkreutz after 120 years. So now we have this situation, right? Christian Rosenkreutz was allegedly this guy who went around to the Middle East and he found out about alchemy and medicines and all kinds of stuff. And, he was this Hermetic philosopher and kind of a magician. And so then he dies and they find his tomb 120 years later. And, it opens up the tomb and all of his secrets are revealed. And the Rosicrucian Society then keeps these secrets. So, it's 120 years. That's the time frame. It's a very important time frame for the Crowley people as well. So they've adopted this whole concept, right? 120 years, very important anniversary.
Do you think there's anything to read into it, or is it just one of these coincidences?
It depends on which level you want to look at this stuff. On your day-to-day level, it's a coincidence. Yeah. Who cares? Right. Then you go a little bit deeper, and then you realize there's all kinds of connections. Then you get a little bit deeper than that, and you say, yeah, but it's not that important. And then you go a little bit deeper again, and you find more connections, right? You know that famous Zen saying, before I studied Zen, mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. When I studied Zen, mountains were no longer mountains, rivers were no longer rivers. But when I attained nirvana, mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. Eventually you're going to come right back around, but you have to make that travel. You have to make that journey. Otherwise, you're not really on the same page, right? So you've got to go through all of that. You've got to see all these things. You've got to deal with the paranoia. You've got to deal with the suspicions and the coincidences and the synchronicities as if they were separate little things floating around that are like insects buzzing around your head. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you get through that and they all fall into place. And you get a vista again of what reality is. And it looks pretty nice from there. But all the paranoia is gone. All the mysteries are gone. Everything now looks clear, whereas it really didn't before. That's why you were propelled to take that journey. You've got to take it first, get through it, and come out the other side. Not stay in it for too long, because then you go nuts, right? Then you'll just multiply synchronicities like crazy. So yes, it's meaningful. Absolutely, it's meaningful. The April 8th solar eclipse is meaningful to a bunch of people, who are really attuned to that. To most of us, we're not going to notice it. I will make a caveat. This is the first time in our history that we are now connected electronically to everyone. You and I are talking over an electronic medium. We've never met. You've never been in the same place. I don't know where you are, right? You don't know where I am. I'm in Florida. That's basically it. I'm in South Florida. But we're connected anyway. And right now our consciousness is kind of connected. We're talking to each other. We're exchanging ideas and information. And we can see each other. This is weird, okay? It doesn't seem weird to young people, but it's weird to me because this didn't happen back then, when we started all this conspiracy stuff. Now we're dealing with a medium that is transmitting this consciousness around the globe at the speed of light. We have a vulnerability there that's not just people misusing social media. It's not just people posting crap on YouTube. We have a vulnerability to an NHI or to some other intelligence that can just use this as their medium for control, medium for installing information that's not true or their point of view about something. They can manipulate images. Isn't that how the aliens during alien abduction scenarios have communicated to the abductees? Not with words, not with language. They telepathically send images. Now they don't need to do that. They could just use the internet for that. So we are now in a state of tremendous vulnerability. So these little coincidences that we're talking about, they multiply like crazy. They will multiply and create more coincidences, and they will create a coincidence stream that's going to be hard to get out of, right? So this manipulation can take place, whether it's demonic in a sense that it's malicious or evil, or whether they're trying to save us from something. I think neither of that is true. It's just going to happen because they can. And what are our defenses against it, right? Do we just unplug? Like Neo in Matrix? Just unplug, man, you'll be fine. Or do we plug in and see what we can do? Do we find out what's behind this simulation? Because it can become a simulation because we're relying too much on this medium. And the more we rely upon it, the more susceptible we are to a real simulation taking place that we can't recognize as a simulation.
Right. It's like, how do you know that the information you're getting is true? I mean, in recent years, if I ever wanted to know what's going on in Ukraine or what's going on in something kind of related to military affairs, I call friends who are in the military and they can tell me. So I'll give you an example. So there's this story about a drone swarm over Langley Air Force Base, right? And the journalist, as usual, didn't do their job, right? So it was written in a sensationalist viewpoint, but he did use the words UAS, unmanned aerial system, okay? That is distinct from unidentified anomalous phenomena, okay? Mm-hmm. So there's code right there that what you're dealing with is man-made, okay? And they're drone swarms. They're likely man-made drone swarms. So, of course, if they're man-made, why the F aren't we shooting them down? So, without getting into too much detail and without disclosing an identity, I, know somebody in the Air Force who is of rank, just sent him kind of a quick message. And, it was colorful. Like, you guys need to get your heads out of your, I'm a former Army officer, so I've earned the right to speak that way sometimes.
Right.
And he kind of just came back and he's like, it's jurisdictional. And that's all you could say. But I got it, right? Mm-hmm. I got it. So, but you're still seeing on UFO Twitter and, the people are working themselves up into a frenzy that it's a legal thing that they need to work out. Calm down. Right. But the military can come out and officially say that all they want. Right. Nobody's gonna believe them.
Right.
And the media is so bad that in terms of, and it's not bad as an evil. I just mean they're so sloppy. They're untrained. They don't ask the military the right questions because they're incented to have access. It's all based on access and less on, which is why they kind of just repeat. So kind of the best ways I get news is I'll read what's out there, but there's two things I look for. One, I'll just call a direct source and just try to figure out what's going on. And if it corroborates, I know I can, to some degree, trust the article. I'll look at what all the major media, both Fox, CNN, MSNBC, if they all agree on something, it's either true or the government wants you to believe that.
Right.
Okay. And then the last piece is, what aren't they reporting? What aren't they talking about? Right. So there's not a lot of news. I mean, there's some news, but there's not a lot of news about Ukraine right now. Right. So my read on that is it is not going well. It is not going well. But I don't know that for a fact. But you're right about this reality, right? You could easily steer people into, in fact, there's a book, I think it was produced in or written in 2012 by Eli Pariser called The Filter Bubble, right? And what's happened since the advent of social media, search algorithms, Google, is that there's this confirmation bias. And things have gotten a lot more, or he kind of predicted things were going to get a lot more partisan because people are just kind of migrating away from each other as they're seeking their, and they may have been, it's kind of this ideological drift that's happening based on they're just getting further and further down their respective rabbit holes. Anyway, that's a long meander, but there's a lot of this stuff is happening all at once. So there's not one answer to why everything's so crazy right now. But if you want to get information, you have to work for it. You can't just take what you're
well, you have to. You can't just take what you see. I mean, anywhere, right? You have to look for it. You have to pull at the threads and follow it down. The problem is we have the ability to do that in many cases. We have tremendous tools at our disposal, but we've gotten so lazy about using it. We just want it fed to us. And what we're fed becomes the truth, becomes the reality. We are believing people. We're believing entities, right? Belief still really controls a lot of what we think we know. So we have a bias towards we want to believe this, we don't want to believe that. And that puts us in silos. And it used to do that, all the time for all of human history, but it's gotten really bad now because now you can create your own little silo. You can pick and choose and create your own TV station, basically, or your own, TV channel lineup from what you collect that's available and create something that's going to tell you what you already think you know. And when that happens, of course, then, there is no information anymore. It's all a question of ideology. You're ideologically set up to believe this or to believe that. And when we're dealing with this phenomenon, we're completely in a different realm because for most people, this is a question of belief. There's no knowledge because we're not getting enough information. We're not getting enough data, right? So you fall back on belief systems, right? I believe this is an alien. I believe this is an angel or a demon, or I believe this or I believe that. And you can't get at the freaking truth. Jacques Vallée, I think, early on in his career, he identified the UFO phenomenon as a control mechanism, right? This is a control mechanism. You're being controlled. This is a way we're controlling what you see, think, feel. This is not what you think it is. Stop talking about aliens. Stop talking about flying saucers. This is a control mechanism. And he was already pointing that out, I think, back in the 60s. He was aware that this is how this was being used, or this is what it really was, not how it was being used, but it is a control mechanism, not by us, maybe by something else, but they're using it as a control mechanism. They're contributing to what's happening now. Divide and conquer. And instead of just dividing a country from a country, they're dividing all the people in the country from each other. This massive division's taking place. So we will be unable to defend ourselves if they really are intending a takeover of some kind, if they really want the planet for themselves. If we had countries divided against each other, that's bad enough. But again, I'm talking about Reagan. I don't know why Reagan comes up now all the time, but Reagan made that speech to the United Nations, right? We have to unite against the forces of some other planetary galaxy, right? I mean, said the quiet part out loud, right? There's a dangerous stuff out there. We've got to get our act together or else we're going to be vulnerable. Well, we're already divided.
Way, MacArthur said that in 1962 to his speech at West Point, right?
At West Point, yep.
Yeah.
Reagan said it, and MacArthur said a version of the same thing. I have it in Sinister Forces, the two quotes. So, and the sinister forces of some planetary galaxy. I mean, he used that term, sinister forces.
Yes.
So that's, So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that we're being manipulated now, in the sense that this division can only benefit an enemy. It can only benefit a foe. And that foe could be Russia. Obviously, they are definitely a foe. It could be China. But most possibly, it could also be this phenomenon, because we are so vulnerable to it right now. We're ready to defend ourselves individually, but nobody's ready to defend their community. Nobody's ready to defend their country the way we used to think, the way we used to believe in it. We're now looking at our neighbors suspiciously. It's one of the problems I had. Yeah, go on.
I think if something showed up, came to some people's homes,
Mhm.
and I think a huge percentage of the American population would work with them right before working with the government.
There
I
you
think
go.
that's where we are right now. I think it's that bad. But anyway,
Yeah.
continue your thought.
No, but that is, that's pretty much it. They would work with them first before they would actually defend their fellow humans. I mean, when we have discussions about Second Amendment stuff, the guns. I mean, I live not too far from Parkland, a few minutes away, where that took place. So there's a lot of heated conversations here about guns, and I say, look, I trust myself with guns. I don't trust you.
Right.
You're my neighbor. I don't know I don't know what the hell's going through in your head. Do I defend my Second Amendment rights? I defend my Second Amendment rights, but I'm not defending your Second Amendment rights, man, because I don't trust you. I don't trust you over there. I don't trust you over there. Why would we trust? I mean, it doesn't make sense. We have to really trust each other in order to trust this idea of owning lots of guns. I mean, people own, this is Florida. There's like ridiculous amount of guns floating around.
Yeah,
And now they pass laws like
your
open
situation
carry.
is the exact opposite of mine. There are lots of guns floating around, but only the criminals have them where I live.
Well, around here, I don't know. I can't tell the criminal from the good guy. I mean, that's the problem. We really don't know who's who here. So that's the question. And this is the reality that we have to contend with. There's an ideology, which is pretty, and then there's the reality. And the reality is just a lot worse, and it's a lot harder to deal with. And we have to mature a bit as a society to get to the point where we can handle these issues intelligently. But we're not doing it now. We're falling into belief systems. We're falling into silos. And if you don't believe like me, then you're demonic and you're sacrificing babies in the basement of a pizza parlor.
Right.
And that's where we're at, and I got so mad over that. I said, do you really believe that Hillary Clinton needs to use the basement of a pizza parlor to sacrifice babies? Do you think she would do that? She has access to real estate all over the world, you idiots. But
yeah, a pizza parlor in the capital of the
sure.
seat of government. Right. Yeah. That's a good place.
Nice,
good place.
Non-existent basement, but let's say a nice drafty cement basement. We're going to sacrifice kids there. Hope they don't hear the scream.
A good conspiracy theorist would say, exactly, they're hiding it in plain sight. You'll never think to look there, right? And you could just take these arguments into a death spiral.
Yeah. That's the problem, right?
And the other thing, too, is the more intelligent you are, the easier it is to spin seemingly related facts into a coherent narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's something I'll fall into, right? Like, you give me 3 facts, I can spin a plausible story. And it could be complete. It's likely to be complete nonsense. Mm-hmm. But in the absence of information, that's what people are doing. So I think
that's why we have religion, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the absence of information. So we create stories that explain things. And everybody creates their own story to explain things. And my story is different from your story, so you have to die. Right? You're an infidel. We have to kill you because you don't believe what I believe. We're not sharing the same fantasy, man. That's dangerous.
Well, and that's the thing with all this. I think, I don't know what your experience has been, but the more I delve into this thing, the more it's like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, right? I get closer to that electron, right? And I can explain a little, the more I fine tune where it's located, the less I know how fast it's going, or whatever Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is. But the more you look into this, the more amorphous it is, right? At first, I kind of went into it thinking it's ETs, and now it's like, but is it? You could come up with a good argument for time travelers. You could come up with a good argument for time traveling ETs, right? Because anything that's going at the speed of light, probably by nature, will have to warp space-time. In doing so, you're messing with time in some way, right? It could be ultra terrestrials. It could be angels and demons, right? I wouldn't sneer at it, but I don't think it is, but it could be some proto version of that, what we thought our ancestors thought were angels and demons were really some sort of ultra terrestrial. Who knows,
Well,
right?
that was Secret Machines. My first book was Secret Machines Gods, and it kind of approached it that way. Look at all the religions, look how they describe these things, look at the commonalities, see if we can derive a common thread. That is probably where the truth lies, somewhere in there. And then Secret Machines Man was about the scientific aspect of it, right? Let's look at the biology, the anthropology, the archaeology. Let's look at the sciences and see if we could come up with what this phenomenon is based on that, right? And then Secret Machines War, which is coming out maybe the end of this year, is about how we handle it from the point of view of conflict, colonization, and some of the military experiences of different countries in dealing with the phenomenon as well, and how that shakes up things. And so the idea is that we don't define our terms well enough so that we don't share the same meanings for things. So we can say, is it ET? ET is a convenient term, extraterrestrial, not from this earth. But then that brings up, opens, well, no, I think it's an ultra-terrestrial. Okay, it's something which is not us. And Timothy Good, the famous UFO researcher, he wrote a lot of books, the British researcher. I had the pleasure of meeting him years ago in Amsterdam. We were doing this conference. And we shared a bottle of scotch, as it turned out, because we were just bored stiff with everything that else was going on. But he said, try this experiment, Go into any crowded place. Could be an airport, very good places an airport. Could be a shopping mall, whatever, with a lot of people around. Airports are the best. Just sit somewhere peacefully, close your eyes, and think for a second that you want to see an alien. You want to see one of these beings, right? Just peacefully get yourself in that frame of mind. And then open your eyes and see what happens, right? So I said, okay, cool, I'm going to try that. And I did. I was in Amsterdam, so I'm flying back to the States. And I do that, and I sit there peacefully and, do that. And I open my eyes, and a woman from across the way turns around, looks at me, smiles, waves. Now, I had the experience of the weird people in Rhode Island. I think you've heard the story, maybe. I had a Man in Black experience, but without any UFO involved. You haven't? Some people like to hear the story. It's kind of a little
I definitely
bizarre.
would like. My audience would love to hear it.
Yeah, well,
sure.
it's a strange thing, and I don't like. I was not involved in UFO anything at the time, and I'm living in Rhode Island, in a small town called Westerly, Rhode Island. It's on the border of Rhode Island and Connecticut.
Which is also very Lovecraftian, right? I mean, that's
very
Lovecraft.
much so. Yeah. 30 minutes from Providence, right? So there I am. It's a small country road. There's a 2-lane road outside the house. And it's, it's not really remote, but it's remote enough. I mean, it's just a house here, a house over there, a house over there. I have come back from shopping. I drove into my driveway, and I'm unloading the car in front of the house. And I look up, and there is an old model black Cadillac idling in front of the house, and there's a camera with a wide-angle lens pointing at me. And I'm thinking, what the fuck is this, right? I wasn't involved in anything particularly weird at the time. So I put down the package of groceries, and I start walking over to the car, because this is unusual. This doesn't happen in these small towns like this at this time. This is, I think, 1990. And I walk over, and the car takes off, right? Like really fast. So I'm going to follow him. I go to my car, and I'm going to get ready to the car to pull out of the driveway and follow this car, because now this is really weird. It's like a government thing, or a private detective, or God knows what. And as I'm trying to get in my car, another car pulls into the driveway, blocking me. And it's an old model sedan with the wood paneling on the side, these station wagons, Mm-hmm. So there was an old-fashioned, black Cadillac, and now there's this old-fashioned station wagon with the wood paneling. And the door is open, and out from this car, 2 women come out. And they're dressed oddly. They're dressed like in woolen coats, and they have this very pale appearance. And they're sort of redhead, as I recall, kind of red or blondish hair, strawberry blonde maybe. 2 of them, they come out of the car. And they walk up to me and they say, "Excuse me, sir, do you know where De Vilbius lives?" The name De Vilbius. And I'm agitated because I want to follow that car and they're blocking me, right? I said, no, I don't think there's anybody. I don't know anybody by that name. Thank you. They get back in the car, pull out slowly and take off. And of course, I'm not going to be able to follow the black Cadillac. Like an idiot, it doesn't occur to me to follow that car. They obviously stopped me from following the first one, right? But I don't think of it, right? I think that was the idea. I got confused. And so they took off. And I'm thinking, DeVilbiss? Well, there's nobody. But the name was familiar to me. So I start looking it up and I try to find, there's no DeVilbiss in the entire state of Rhode Island. Okay, none. No phone book listing, nothing for DeVilbiss. But there is a company in Ohio called DeVilbiss. And this company was mentioned to me by a guy I used to work with, like the year or so before, who had used to work at Huntsville at NASA, right? Mm-hmm. Now he's an engineer and he's sort of semi-retired, I think, at this point, or he's still working in a small shop where we used to work. And I was a salesperson. He was like one of the engineers. And he said, oh, if you're looking for sales, you should call this company DeVilbiss in Ohio. And that's where the name came from. They plucked it out of my head because there's no DeVilbiss in Rhode Island, right? This name was kind of found, like rummaged around. Here's DeVilbiss. Do you know where this is? Knowing there was no DeVilbiss, you know. So, okay, now I'm freaked out, but I can't figure out two cars, these old model cars. I said, this is like a Men in Black thing. Mm-hmm. But I haven't seen any UFOs. I'm not, they're not checking up on me with the UFO thing. And this is just around the time of the first Gulf War, right? So it's like December, January, I think 90 to 91. So that's Gulf War era. And I'm thinking, does it have to do with that somehow? I mean, I had traveled to China a lot, before then. Is it something to do with that? I couldn't imagine. China and Gulf War doesn't go together. So I did international travel for a while then. I can't figure it out. Okay, no problem. A few years later, still in the 90s, I've now relocated to Malaysia. And I'm flying back and forth. And I'm flying from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore. And I'm going from Singapore, I think, back to Kuala Lumpur. And I'm dragging my ass through the Singapore airport. And I'm dragging my suitcase. And as I'm going through the airport, someone taps me on the shoulder. Now, if you know Asia, you don't do that. I mean, you just don't. Asians don't do that, basically. But someone tapped me on the shoulder and didn't say anything, just tapped me on the shoulder. So I turned around to see who it was. And it was the woman from the car, right? The little woman in the weird coat. And she smiles and waves at me and then keeps on walking. I just stare at her like, what the hell? So I take off after her. And of course, she's not there, right? Mm-hmm. She hits me on the shoulder like, we're watching you, right? We're here. And I'm thinking, why? Why? What am I doing to get this kind of attention, right? I mean, at that point, I was kind of working on Sinister Forces, but not really. I was very busy with the job I was doing. I was in international sales. I was running around doing all this other stuff. This was always in the back of my head, my other occupation, but, I was preoccupied with other things. But they're just like, we're here, see ya. And so that was my Men in Black episode. It was, generic Men in Black, old Cadillac, right? Black Cadillac, two guys in the front, but they took off before I could stop and see who they were. And then I got stopped from pulling out of the driveway. And that was the freakiest thing. An old-fashioned car, another one, two cars. And so I talked to people in the intelligence community and they said, later on, years went by, and they said, no, two cars, four people for you? And I said, no. I said, thanks a lot. But they said, no, why would they do that? That's a lot of firepower for just some guy living in a house in Rhode Island. They wouldn't need to do that. Why would they use two cars? And I said, and these were two, old model cars. I mean, these cars were really old. They said, no, that's not us. That's none of the intelligence community. They wouldn't do that. That's just not their style. If they wanted to spy on you, they would spy on you and you wouldn't know it, right? They wouldn't be so obvious to hang out like that. So I don't know what that meant. But then again, I'm swimming in this kind of sea of weirdness and coincidences and synchronicities. So God knows what any of that meant.
Have you found that when you're working on a particular book, or even when you first started, that as you were going down this road, other problems were solved for you, like i.e. making money, things like that? When you first start writing books, like it's not
no, yeah, you don't make money writing books, right? But in a way, yes, you have to kind of relax the tension, You have to get to a point where you just let it go. And when that happens, things start to happen. If you're still fighting, it's because you're still struggling for a specific outcome. And that's probably short-sighted of you. You probably would be better off sort of doing something else, but you can't imagine what that might be. So you need, in a sense, the universe to come and tell you, to tap you on the shoulder at an airport and say, we're going to do this now. So this is, yeah, I do agree with you. Sometimes these problems do go away. You can be in the midst of all sorts of weirdness, and then some strange thing happens out of nowhere, and suddenly it changes your life one way or the other, but usually for the better if you're clean living and all that, but you can find that things do improve, if that's a word of comfort to anybody listening to this. Sometimes you have to just release the tension that you have over something because you can't see clearly when your eyes are that squinched and you're just, gritting your teeth. You can't see what's going on. There's other things available. The world is very malleable. Reality is very malleable. It's very subject to change. It's very subject to manipulation. If you can be manipulated by reality, you can return the favor. You can turn that around and start manipulating reality in turn. And that's the whole basis of magic and mysticism and all of that, is the idea that you can be the magician. Reality itself is always the magician, but you can switch the tables. You can become the magician. You can become the person who has some control over reality. That is possible.
Any final words for the audience in terms of navigating this whole disclosure? Is the president ever going to come out and say, this is real? We don't know as much as you'd like us to know, but these are kind of some of the core facts that we know, and this is what we're doing about it? Or do you think that's always going to be something that's always just beyond the horizon, but we never get to it?
Well, number one, no matter what president comes out and says it, half the country won't believe him. So it's not going to push the ball down the field too much. Two, what would that press conference look like? Excuse me, Mr. President, are they little and green? Are they, the whole thing will devolve. And the president would not be able to answer most of those questions, which will make it look like he's lying again. So that's the problem that we have with the president doing it. I don't think the president can do that unless he really has all the ducks in a row at that point, and they can come out with a full disclosure. And I don't think the president, quite frankly, has the access. We had this discussion with John Podesta back in 2015. Everybody was saying that Tom was full of shit. He didn't know anybody. He didn't know anything. He's talking out of his hat. And then WikiLeaks happened, and revealed that he was telling the truth all this time, which then made everybody even more mad. And that's another story. So Podesta is telling us, we asked him, can the president just release the UFO information? We just bluntly asked him. It's on tape. We sat there and we said, come on, spill. You're the UFO guy. You were the UFO guy with Obama, right? Can you do this? And he said, this is the problem. There is no box labeled UFO in the government, right? UFO information is scattered throughout so many different agencies and branches of government with different kinds of security clearances. The president is allowed to ask for anything, and you have to give it to him. He's the president. He has that authority. The problem is he doesn't know what to ask for. And he doesn't know who to ask. So he can ask his aides and say, I want all the information on UFOs. That aide doesn't know where to go. So he goes to the Pentagon, right? And he gets the runaround from the Pentagon. He gets a runaround from CIA, runaround from NSA, everybody else. Who knows? DEA maybe has it, So all this stuff goes on and nothing happens because, of that reason. Plus the government has its own specific system of classification. And this was talked about to me, and I was like, oh my God, no wonder nothing gets done. Podesta told us bluntly, he said, you understand that you read a memo that's marked classified top secret, you will read that memo, which means that we put top secret classified on everything. He says the menu for the cafeteria will have top secret classified on it if they want people to read the menu. And then you can't declassify the damn thing because everybody who is involved in the classification procedure has to sign off on the declassification procedure. So if it went to the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, they all have to declassify that document before you can see it. They said that is the problem. Number one, we classify everything way too much than it has to be. And number two, our systems are so baroque, and not broke, but baroque. Well, maybe both.
Right.
Yeah. So that trying to declassify something is hell, right? So he said, this is the problem. The president can ask for it. Any president can ask for the UFO stuff, but we don't know where to go with it. We don't know where to, it says E. Podesta didn't know where to go, right? Where do I go to get this information? Who has it? And how do we say it's UFO, really? It won't be marked UFO. It might be marked something else, a crashed vehicle of unknown origin or something. They may not fall into a UFO category. So that's why you had guys like Lou Elizondo trying to set up this operation inside the Pentagon that would be kind of a clearinghouse for some of this. But even then, nobody was fully cooperating with them, right? And even Chris Mellon, an assistant deputy secretary of defense, did not have automatic access to what Lou Elizondo was doing. He did get it. He went away, got the right tickets, and came back and said, okay, I've got it. Now you can talk to me. But that's how tightly all of this was held. When a secretary of defense, well, the deputy secretary of defense couldn't get it automatically, right? So this is the problem that we're facing with disclosure. Beyond what we discussed already, beyond the fact that they probably don't know what the hell to do with the information that they have. They don't know how to define it, how to understand it, and how to present it. There's probably a core thing there that they can tell us, but it would change probably the course of history too fast because they don't have the rest of the information. They don't have the rest of the data. They can't explain to us what they have. They can say, we've got this. And the follow-up question is, what is it? And their answer is, well, we don't know. More chaos ensues. I think if you think all of that through, you can see the kind of predicament they're in because Russia hasn't come out. China hasn't come out. Nobody's come out and said, this is definitively it. France is trying to, Brazil trying to. They create committees. They try to figure this out. No one has come out. Our enemies have not come out and said, this is what we have. This is the UFO phenomenon. This is what a UFO is. Nobody's done it. It's not just us. It's everybody. It's the whole thing. So I understand the frustration with our government. And as somebody who has dealt with from both sides and on the receiving end and the giving end in the government, I can tell you, I feel your pain. But by the same token, these guys are not always in possession of everything they have that we need to know. And that makes them nervous. That makes them insecure. That makes them reluctant to talk about it at all because they know the follow-up questions are coming and they can't answer them. They don't know the answers. We'll be happy with a piece of a downed craft, right? We'll be happy with a verifiable photograph of an alien for the first few minutes. After that, we're going to ask a lot more questions and then we're going to be back to the races again. That's the problem that I see.
What do you make of Kirkpatrick in the latest Arrow report? Like, that's almost the exact opposite approach.
Yeah,
right?
I know. I know.
What's going on there? Is it
the internal politics once again? Everybody, the fix is in, to a certain extent. So everybody's trying to cover their ass on this thing. It's gone too fast. It's gone faster than the Pentagon and faster than Congress expected it would go. And there are very vocal people in Congress who want this out now, who want to push for it. And there's equally vocal people who are trying to stop it using any means necessary, coming up with all kinds of national security reasons and everything else, fighting over whistleblower laws and whistleblower accommodations and stuff. All of the stuff going on is making it a mess. But that just shows you how important this is, how important they understand it is. If there was nothing there, this would be out in the open already. It would just solve the problem. There's nothing here. Here's everything we've got, but they're not there. Somebody's fighting to keep this from reaching us. And that's going to go on for a little while, but it's not going to last long. The cat is out of the bag, and we all have our cell phones. We all have access to the sky. This is not going to last very long. This is not the 18th, 19th century America anymore. Yep.
Especially if we have like a 1952 flap where they just start showing up everywhere, right?
Right.
And people
need
start
another
reporting
one.
it.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. It was absolutely fascinating, and hopefully we have you on again because I think this is a fascinating discussion. So
thanks very much for having me.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.